Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and this is episode 473. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Stacy. That is at StacyPatton89 on Twitter. Stacy, how are you doing?
Doing well. Looking at your shirt, reminding me that could be better, but I don't know if you're watching, but it's
I'm not watching now.
Yeah, not pretty.
It happens. All right. Well, we're not here to talk about college basketball. At least I don't think we are. But before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. First being that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you maybe watch this podcast. If you are not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.strick.land. There's a link that'll take you to the merchandise store, and there's all kinds of cool stuff that you can find on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. The Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland's podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Takes from Obvious Boses, a podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, a.k.a. Doug, along with Zach Blatter, and you get access to the Strickland Discord where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, our solo pod, where I rant for you about the Knicks team more. You also get access to a wonderful premium articles by Matthew Moreno, one of the best in the business, and you get access to Strickland NFL, which you guessed it is a podcast by the NFL that is hosted by Konstantin Metrikos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. There is a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits, like listening in on pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting in 2025. Well, whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With a large selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Look, I've talked plenty about the Knicks in the last 2 days as they're in the midst of a 3-game losing streak. They lost to the Lakers in a very, very competitive game that was extremely frustrating down the stretch, and I think was frustrating in a lot of the ways that have been. I guess it was frustrating in some of the offensive approach, which I think have been steady criticisms of Thibs, not even just this year, but going back to basically the entire duration of his time in New York, of the end game offense really bogging down into just an endless sequence of isolations. Obviously, Jalen Brunson getting hurt in overtime put an extreme damper on things. He's out for at least 2 weeks, is the reporting. They then lost on the second night of a back-to-back to the Clippers, an equally frustrating game. A little bit more sympathetic to that, given second night of a back-to-back. You played an overtime game the night before. You're out Jalen Brunson. I talked with Prez yesterday. I thought the defensive effort overall, not necessarily perfect, but I would say the last 2 games much improved from what we had experienced for large parts of 2025. So that's good to see. But I guess what have been your takeaways during this 3-game losing streak? They lost. Look, and to be fair, like 2 of these losses, and I'm not trying to moral victory this stuff, but they lost to the Warriors without Cat. Warriors are 11-2 since the Butler trade, and that was a game that they were down 1 point halfway through the fourth quarter, and that's with them admittedly playing below par. Like, they've been in these games, it's can you get across the finish line? They haven't done that against some of these best teams. And then obviously, you play the Lakers, who were undefeated, or they were on an 8-game winning streak until last night, when the Celtics took them down. And also they have their own injury now too, with LeBron maybe potentially missing a couple of weeks. I don't know. I guess, what are your just thoughts on what you're seeing from them? And are you concerned? Are you, and is that concern more of like I don't know what this team's ceiling, or if they can hit the ceiling of what I think this group can do is, or is this more of like or is it a concern that you have of, or just they need to figure their shit out in the short term?
I think we're both at the place where, it's not going to happen this year in terms of making some deep run. I think it's at this point, yeah, like I have personally tried to downplay the Cavs. That's not a thing. That is a serious title threat. If I was just a basketball fan, agnostic of anything, I would actually really enjoy watching the Cavs Celtics series because that is, I think, going to be very competitive. In the short, so I'm thinking about how this team, but it's a process. And even beyond just the personnel moves, right? Just getting guys comfortable, getting them to adapt. It is a little bit of a longer process than we might have thought, right? It's everyone has to adjust. Benji from Knicks Film School posted a clip. Teams have been putting a center on Hart and a wing on Cat, and Cat is coming down the floor. Semi-transition. Deuce has the ball, and there's finally a 5 on him, and Deuce waved him off. Right, and it's critical to get Cat the ball when you do get those opportunities to punish it. Right. And the Knicks, I mean, some of that is just comfort. Some of that might be coaching. As far as these losses this week, I didn't find them nearly as disturbing as some of the blowouts to Cleveland and Boston. In the moment, I really wanted them to beat LA, just because it feels like they never beat Luka and LeBron. I know they have, but it feels like those guys really show out a lot. And I thought they did a reasonably good job.
I know, I agree. I think another reason why I really wanted them to win that game is I thought that broadcast was fucking embarrassing. Like, it was ridiculous listening to it. It was just constant, like in every play that Luka made, it was like this. They had to have a 15-minute discussion about the trade and what it means for the Lakers. And I'm like, dude, enough. Like, I get it. We all get it. Like, I don't need, like, you talked about it at the top of the fucking game, right? Like, I don't need.
We've talked about it for the last, month?
Right. Yeah. It was just like, I understand. Okay. If you want to talk about it at the start of a game or at some point during the course of the game, that's totally reasonable, right? Like, I don't think that's really an issue at all. But to like talk about it and then talk about it again and talk about it again and talk about it again. And then on top of that, you have Candace Parker, where it's like every 50-50 call, she's like, oh, like she's going out of her way to just be like, oh, what a great, like, this is obviously a foul in the Knicks. And then if the Knicks get a call, it was like, oh, I don't know about that one. And I'm like, you're being like, this is actually a joke now. Like, I can't understand this. I mean, I can't understand it since Brunson's not a 1A and she's a Bears fan, so she gets it. But like, it was just, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but I that really was fucking annoying listening to it. And then also, like, she kept saying, like, she was like, oh man, like, the Knicks really need Cat to drive more and not just settle for threes. And I'm like, have you watched him this year? Like, have you watched Karl-Anthony Towns? Like, if anything, most Knicks fans, all of us were like, dude, please take more threes. Please take more threes. So it was just all kinds of frustrating listening to that broadcast. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I definitely echo a lot of those sentiments. In general, ESPN, I think, I mean, the coverage of the Knicks has been more negative in general. Worthwhile. I mean, it's kind of like they build you up when you're coming up, and then there's nothing. The one thing people like more than seeing a team beat the odds is to see someone underachieve or fail. That's what's happening with the Knicks right now, right? Kendrick Perkins has been super critical. I mean, he just said they haven't had a good win in the last month. They've beaten Memphis. Miami is not some elite team, but I thought that was a gritty win. So I think that's part of it. Talking about the Knicks it's a big market team. Talking about them when they were overachieving and highlighting them is something Kendrick did. And a lot of the criticism is fair.
It also comes from a place of like, hey, look, like, whether we like it or not, you make the trades the Knicks made, like, expectations are heightened and everything is going to be viewed through that lens. And like last year, I thought it was really, really frustrating when it was like every conversation was like, well, do the Knicks have a true 1A superstar? And like, that was the entire conversation constantly. Like, this year, I actually think the conversation is more fair and justified to be like, they're not a contender. And I think, like, while I can sit here and understand, like, I didn't think they were a contender coming into the season, and I was okay with that. I understood why they made the moves they made. And I think there's a path for them to still get to contention in the next couple of years. I think it's fair for neutral analysts and fans of other teams, obviously, to not kind of just to be kind of take the, I don't want to say take the low, like take low blows, but kind of to just be super critical.
Yeah. So it is what it is there in terms of, but in terms of the games they played, thought they were competitive against Golden State. Golden State and LA, by the way, have both been playing really well since their trades. I wanted to beat Golden State. I hope they have that matchup circled because I do think they have a shot. The Jimmy trade has obviously been positive for them. I think there's some spacing issues that to say a team with Steph Curry has spacing issues is obviously gassing it. But I think that the Knicks showed, I think that, yeah, like we're right now not on the level of the top three teams, but they kept lumping the Lakers into that 0-9 thing, but I think it was unfair. Like they've been very competitive with the Lakers in both games. This one could have gone either way. And then last night they didn't have, or 2 nights ago they didn't have Brunson. I thought,
and that game, and like, look, the Clippers aren't a contender. That's just a loss that you have in the season. It's not like,
but the Clippers are a good team in LA on the second night of back-to-back. Yes, you didn't travel, but that's not a bad loss either, right? It's not like they lost to.
I don't know, man. They traveled all the way to Inglewood.
Inglewood always up to no good. So they play in a different arena now, right? Or it's still crypto.com. The Clippers.
Yeah. It's crypto.com.
So, I think that so looking at the issues with this team, so what is going to get them? We have talked about, they still have the flexibility to make moves if they need to. I do think, though, there's going to need to be some internal improvement. And when it's improvement, it's more calibration than any specific skill development from a few guys on the team and stylistically as a whole. Number one, I don't think either of us question the fact that Brunson can be the top option on a team and is an elite guy like down the stretch in games. That's really what people are talking about, right? It's like, do you have a guy who can, when the defenses are locked in, when everything's been scouted to death, get you a bucket? And I think Brunson's proven he can do that. Now, the other issue is something that Kobe talked about with the Houston Rockets teams, right? And Kobe Bryant was obviously a pretty ball dominant player, but he was saying like you need everyone to kind of be involved. And the Rockets had some great offenses, but they struggled in the playoffs. Part of it was they kept running into a dynasty, but part of it was like spread pick and roll with Harden just having to be amazing. In addition to the fact that he doesn't have the mid-range game to Brunson, or he just didn't take mid-range shots really at that time. It's you need more balance, right? And I think that is, the defense we know is a work in progress. So the offense, really falling over the last couple months really has a lot to do with the fact that, even as Brunson has ascended, I thought before he got hurt, he's been playing at an elite level. The rest of the guys are just, Cat is now struggling with a wing on him. That's where you want to be other guys to exploit matchups. Bridges isn't as involved as you'd like. OG I don't think he looked a lot better. I mean, I've said this, but like the first quarter of the game, OG was of the Lakers game, considering how great he was overall, it's almost funny how horrible he was in that first quarter. I really wanted to throw something. He kept running. He kept driving into traffic, falling down.
I need him to get Nikes. Skechers, not so good so far.
It looked like, I said this on the Discord. It looked like when you see a toddler keep running into furniture. It's like, maybe don't do that. And his defense wasn't great. I thought he locked in and was much better on both ends, but especially just being a lot better in terms of picking his spots as a cutter, as a shooter, not dribbling much. But you need these other guys. You need Bridges to be more involved. You probably would like another guy on the bench who can create. You saw yesterday some of the issues that Deuce is still struggling with. And we need more ways to kind of free up Cat. But you need a little bit more of and you're asking a lot of Jalen. And it's tough to ask that 4 series in a row. And against these top teams that have a lot of versatility, have a lot of different options. So that's number one. So there'll be moves to make. I've been encouraged with what I've seen from Mitchell Robinson, especially next to Cat. So it's nice that they'll have kind of something else to go to. But I think the thing that I've seen, and people have talked about this, and look, this is feelings ball stuff. The Knicks, I don't think, make teams uncomfortable, really, on either end. At times this season they have, when they just Cat and Brunson are just too much. But the way that Boston, like if they get a mismatch, right? Or if you have to cross switch, or if you're scrambling or someone's open for an instant, you have no margin for error. Right now it's a well-oiled machine, but I think Cleveland's there too.
There's no fear factor with this team. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's also just not an ability, and like you have to like I don't know if you watched Celtics Lakers yesterday.
I watched a bit of it towards the end. Yeah.
So it was a competitive game in the first half. In that third quarter is when really everything changed, and Luka. I've rarely seen Luka and LeBron that just out of sorts, and they were getting decent looks. Right, they would get like a mid range with some space. They would, but the Celtics were walling off their drives. They were getting into them on the perimeter. Their rotations were on point. Like Luka gets a step, has a slight angle. Somebody comes in there to make it a tougher layup. LeBron is, where it's normally he can back down a guy if it's ISO. Another guy comes to help, so he has to try and under. These are shots that, again, when Luka and LeBron are on, they can still hit, but they were clearly uncomfortable. And on the other end, the Celtics kept getting in transition, and so like they got the Lakers out of sorts. And it's a really good team. And I've seen the Knicks been able to do that, especially on defense during the Thibodeau era a lot more. And even early in the season on offense more when they were really pushing the pace. And you don't get that feeling. But the last thing I will say is, so I think like one, they need to be able to somehow democratize the offense a little bit more and use Brunson in more creative ways. And I'll highlight, right, the one guard everyone talks about who was a small guard to be the best player in a championship team. He's used in many different ways, right? Steph, the reason Steph doesn't get called a point guard is because he isn't just running pick and roll every player or isolating a lot. He's constantly in motion. He's used off ball. He's used as a cutter. He's coming off pin downs. I think Brunson has the ability to do that. I don't even think his attitude is that he's averse to doing that. That's just not how the offense goes. But, to the extent that there are concerns about Brunson being a small guard, that's how you win with that kind of player. And it just makes everyone else more dangerous too, because there's way more things to worry about. And that's what you're not seeing right now. And then on defense, they need to be able to make teams a little bit more uncomfortable, switch things up, get into guys a little bit. And yeah, like sometimes you have a mismatch. If a team is isolating on a mismatch, that's much better than them getting you in rotation and just firing these open threes. Because the thing is, like, especially these elite teams, there's very few times where like there isn't going to be a good shooter they can find. The Knicks have been good about leaving certain guys open, but that's something you're supposed to do. But I think you're just going to have to find ways to throw teams off balance, especially these superstar players, which I just don't think they've done. The last thing I do want to highlight, though, is that Lakers game would have been over after one quarter if it wasn't for Brunson, who I thought that was one of the most spectacular quarters I've seen from him, not just as a scorer, as a passer, when the whole team was just shell-shocked and Luka and LeBron were getting free runways. He's competed on both ends, and it's kind of a shame that it's going under the radar because the Knicks are struggling as a team. But he's been a big part of it of not having the wheels completely fall off. But having said that, it's not his fault right now that he's asked to do all of this. And you want him to. The Knicks are a way better team with Brunson. Let's not even mince words there. But if this can start to get those other guys involved, get them to play with more confidence, to play together more, right? Instead of just having to find their spots around this very single-minded offense. In the long run, I think that could be useful because that is the kind of adjustment this team needs beyond a personnel move. And that's not just coaching. That's also guys. It's fair to criticize Thibs for maybe not cajoling that out of them, but that is going to be a lot of them getting comfortable together, getting comfortable in their roles, and learning within this offense, where's the space, where do I cut, what are the reads, when do I make, what are my decisions, what are my, those kind of things.
Yeah. I guess it is worth mentioning the Knicks did sign PJ Tucker on a 10-day contract. And, in the kind of reporting you get after it was kind of mentioned how they felt he would add an enforcer mentality to the locker room. And immediately, people are like, oh, this is like, looks, the front office knows this team is soft and they're trying to get, toughen them up. And like, I mean, that's fine. I get why people say that. I think it's a little bit, I think it's different. I think to me, the way I took that is that they, and this is something people have talked about this. I don't think we're unique in bringing this up. Um, it's a little too friendly, right? Everybody, like, there's not a guy who's willing to press somebody else's buttons and get on guys and hold them accountable for stuff. And whether PJ Tucker has that cachet to do that, whether he'll have the voice in the locker room and a voice that carries weight enough in the locker room to do that, I don't know. But that is certainly something about his personality that he can bring to the table. Now, if he's playing like serious minutes, that will be concerning to me. But as far as like adding somebody to the locker room, to your point, you talked about how when the Knicks are playing some of these top teams, like they don't feel like it doesn't feel like they're really able to kind of take the game to them, take the fight to them. In some ways, I think is probably a way to put it. And most notably, however anybody feels about this, Mikal Bridges has come under fire for that. I think at times even Josh Hart, who plays super hard, his lack of focus has come, has been spotlighted. And I mean, it's across the board, right? Cat's soft. He's not playing well enough on defense. He's not locked in, and whatever. You can go on and on down the line with all these various players. But it does feel like they need somebody to give them a little bit of a spark, give them a little bit of an edge, give them a little bit of a fuck you to them. Because that hasn't been there this year. I mean, it hasn't, like, I don't know how to put it. I think there's a difference between being soft and not playing with a real edge to them. And I don't think they have been playing with an edge. Like, I think Mitchell Robinson, when he's played so far this year, I think he gives you something that pretty obviously was lacking prior to him coming back. I thought in that Lakers game, what was kind of frustrating to me about the second half was we saw how well the double bigs worked in the first half when Thibs went to it, and then he never went to it at all in the second half. I thought that was an odd thing.
I mean, how many minutes did Mitch play? He might still be on restriction, right?
He played 13 minutes, but then use the 13 minutes. That's my point. It's like at least use the lineup. I mean, that lineup kicked the Lakers' ass when they were on the floor. So to me, to not use that at all in the second half is pretty weird. Leaving that aside, I think it's obvious that Mitch brings a level of physicality and just a presence defensively that they have lacked. And I think that might highlight some like why a player like PJ Tucker was at least of interest to them as a 10-day signing. Again, I don't want him playing, but even having somebody that has that edge in the locker room on the bench, maybe that has value. I tend to think it's hard for that to matter when you're not playing. Like, it's like the Udonis Haslem thing where you're like, it was so fucking annoying to watch this guy in the Heat for like 10 years. And it's like, he's Heat culture. And it's like, dude, you don't play fucking games. But that being said, and obviously I highly doubt PJ Tucker's going to have the cachet to do some shit like this. And I don't think this situation would arise on our team. But if you remember, there was that situation last year where Butler was kind of like going at Spo, and then Haslam lost it. And he was just like, I mean, he basically was like, I'll fucking fight you right now. And I'm not saying that PJ Tucker needs to start threatening guys to fight them. But if he can, in a timeout, go to Josh Hart and be like, dude, you need to get your head in the game. You need to fucking get your head in the game and start playing to scheme. Start fulfilling your responsibilities on the defensive end of the floor. Stop trying to stop pump faking on threes. Take the fucking three. Take the three. You're open. Take the three. Mikal Bridges, we need you to assert yourself. Like, I understand that maybe you're not, the role is kind of you being in a, you know, like a tertiary kind of thing, and you're in the background, but you have to find ways to impose yourself on the game. We can't have an entire half of you like floating. We can't have games of you floating. Like, you need to be involved. You need to be in the game. So
Do
those are
you
the
think
things that
this, sir, I don't think this has been an issue for the Knicks the last couple of seasons. Do you think it was Hartenstein? Like, do you think that there was someone who played that role that they just haven't had this year?
I just think they
Was it Taj?
had it. I think they just had it more. Like, one thing you got to say about Randall, like, he plays really physical, and while obviously defensively there's all kinds of things that were extremely frustrating about him, I think it's hard to say that didn't have a value. Just that physicality he plays with does mean something. I think Dante definitely plays with more of an edge than a guy like Mikal Bridges. And even at times in 2022-23, I mean, if you remember, people talked constantly like that was part of the reason why people were not happy about, like, why it was like the Knicks need to go get wings. They need to get wings because they were capable of getting bullied at times because they were a smaller team. And that, that was a conversation. Obviously, that team punched above their weight in a lot of ways, maybe. But there was like a bruiser nature to the team a little bit, right? In terms of, again, whatever you think about RJ Barrett, he's going to get his head down, get into the paint. Randall, we know what he did. And then you add Dante last year. Like, I think there was a little bit more of a natural physicality to their team, whereas this year's team is like, even when they've been really good offensively, right? It's been a lot more like really nice flowing sequences of ball and player movement. It's not exactly the same thing. So that is probably how I would try and put it. I don't know if that made sense to you, but yeah, that's what I think. But and that's why I don't know the entire value here of like what PJ Tucker is going to provide them. But if he can at least make it, like, I don't even know how to put it, but like, if, again, I just think it's not just about playing more physical. It's also about being more accountable when guys are not doing their job. And I think they all get along. I think they're like nice guys, and I think they're friends, and they seem to have good chemistry. But good chemistry is fine. You still need to be able to look somebody in the eye and be like, hey, man, you need to get the fuck back on defense. Like, that's not okay. And we've seen this shit too many times, right? How many times this year have we seen sequences where they're not matched up defensively? And you're like, why is that even happening right now? Like, how are you not matched up off of a free throw? How are you like confused about what you're supposed to be doing in all of this at all times? And that's been the case for a long, like, constantly this season. We've seen that, right? We've seen situations where they're not locked in as a group. They don't know what they're doing as a group. And Ken, is just adding PJ Tucker going to solve all that? I'm not super positive about it. Can he have some impact? Maybe he can. And to be quite honest, I'll say this: if you want to pay PJ Tucker for a couple minutes against Golden State and have him lay one on Draymond, I'm fine with that.
I mean, I don't think that's just something that Knicks don't do as an organization.
But maybe they need to. Like, I'm not like, I know it sounds absurd, but like,
that's not been a thing since the 90s, really, for any team.
But no, I'm not saying you're.
I mean, Draymond will do that on his own, but that's not Kerr telling him, right? So like,
I'm not talking about them getting into a fight, but like, there's
send a message, right? Like a hard foul or something.
Hard screen, hard foul, knock him on his ass when he's driving in the lane or something. Like, there is some, like, I think there is, say what you want to, like, Dante was somebody who would, I don't think he was dirty, but if he was in a position to give a hard foul on somebody, he was not apprehensive about doing so. Who on this team right now do you think is giving hard fouls well? Like, I don't really see
Mitch,
it. Like,
maybe, but
yeah, that's about it. Like, I don't see Cat giving hard fouls. I don't see Josh Hart really doing it. I don't see Mikal Bridges certainly not doing it.
Even Deuce, who's like a physical defender, it's not his nature to like really like. He's not like he's a pest, right? But he's not.
His physicality comes through in terms of like fighting over screens. He's actually been. I think he's gone. I don't know if it's been a point of emphasis to him or something, but I think the Knicks have had rebounding issues this year. I actually think he's improved as a rebounder.
Yeah, and he's. I mean, he is. I think Deuce is a pretty good athlete. He's just with the ball, it changes, right? And he's got the physical tools, long wingspan, and all that. So a super nerdy tangent. So what you're talking about, I think, with everyone getting along, right? But not, in math, when you try to find like the high point of a function, imagine like a series of hills. The way you do it is like you take one step. If it's downhill, you go the opposite direction. And if it's up, you keep going in the same direction until you find the top spot, right? But it might not be the highest point, right? It might not be. It could just where you stop, where you say, "Oh, it's down this way, down this way." I'm at the top of some hill, but you don't know if it's the highest hill. And the concept, to avoid with finding that local point is to shake things up. It's called annealing, right? So like you just like move the point a bunch of different areas. So say, fuck moving forward a little bit or downward a little bit based on where you are. We're just going to shake things up. And I think that might be where the Knicks are, where they they get along well. They're a good team, but they're stuck in kind of the same place. And there isn't a guy who's going to disrupt. You're at a good spot, so there's not a guy who wants to like come in and disrupt that. But something you do need to shake things up. And Thibs, that hasn't necessarily been his forte. I think he's great at, again, getting you locked in, getting you focused on where you are, getting focused on the next game. But somebody like, these are the things I think that Riley was very good at as a coach, right? But with the Lakers, with the Knicks, just, those kind of things. And, so maybe, I don't know that Tucker is the answer. I don't know that it needs to be somebody like that. I don't know. I mean, I still believe that Brunson has a command of that locker room and is a really good leader. And, this offseason, if they're disappointed, I believe he could be the guy that like comes in and like says, we're going to change shit, right? We're Bridges, you're my boy, we're best friends. You got to like, we're changing this, right? You're too good to not be playing, being a lot more effective on both ends. Josh, love you, buddy. Fucking, we need you are the guy who needs to be locked in every defensive possession. Forget like the fact that your lapses are way too frequent for any kind of player right now. Your role is so important because of the nature of this roster.
Maybe too important.
Yeah, but when you're being relied on that, we need answers, right? I think Brunson, I could see him taking on a more forceful role because they're no longer ascending to the top. They're kind of in this local maximum. So, a guy like, I'm not a huge PJ Tucker guy. He's at this point in his career, he has asked to be like moved because he's not getting minutes, which, Taj wouldn't do that. Right.
And it's important to note, like, that is a concern, but they only signed him to a 10-day. So like, if it became some like huge issue, right? If he starts kind of becoming problematic in that sense, then maybe, you're not committed to him for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and you're also, it's important to note, right? Some of these guys that might do, I do think Hart plays with an edge and gives them some of what you were talking about. I mean, when a guy he's a clean player, he's not dirty, but teams constantly complain about Josh Hart. He's the kind of guy you hate playing against, right? So I think they have some of that from him, but without locking in, without focus, maybe it's like being a little more vocal. I don't know. It's not having that impact on the rest of the guys. But I do think like long term, I think it's going to have to be, part of being that 1A is being a forceful leader. Giannis in that Bucks locker room. I mean, the Bucks roster wise is not that good, but they have kept it together and really been very impactful. And I think part of that is Giannis, like, it's not just he's frustrated and going to the front office and putting pressure on them. he's a guy that's going to like not only just lead by example, but really get into guys. And I think it's going to have to be Brunson. I think there's a lot of guys in this roster who has anyone in this roster even played in a finals?
Bridges.
Okay, yeah. So you have Bridges, but Hart, Hart really showed out on on a lot of those teams.
Well, again, sorry, sorry, not to interrupt, but Bridges and Campaign. It's kind of funny.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I've campaigned for what the signing was has not been an issue for me at all.
No, not at all.
But Brunson obviously and Hart and Bridges have the title experience from college, but that NBA championship level DNA, the other teams I think all have that. The Celtics obviously have that now. The Thunder don't, but I think they're almost too young to know that that's an issue, and maybe it will be, or maybe it won't. They're just that good. And then the Lakers, obviously, Bron's very experienced. He knows what it takes to win a championship, and that edge, that extra thing that you need. I think Brunson has an innate sense of it, but I think to really get that, look at the 1A guys who have won. They're able to get that out of their teammates. You look back, I mean, obviously the 90s, right? Jordan was more than just the best player on the floor. Again, I'm not saying that anyone should become, I think there are teammates who definitely resented and maybe would have even called him borderline toxic. But he got out of a guy like Dennis Rodman, famously, kind of a loose cannon, right? You look at a guy like Kobe, like really willing and inspiring his teammates, getting everyone to buy in on both ends, every possession. I'm not calling out Brunson for lack of leadership. I think he's given a lot of that to a team that didn't quite have it before he got here. So he's a good leader. I think there is a level he can get to even more. I'm not in that locker room. This is
I mean, there's a time to be like, he's more of a leader by example, which is fine.
I think he's reasonably vocal, but like not, it's not like MJ or Kobe or something like that.
Yeah, he's not somebody who I have not seen him. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he does this in the locker room behind closed doors, for all I know. But I haven't seen him like get on somebody in the course of like, hey, dude, Josh, we need you to lock the fuck in, buddy. Hey, Kat, you got to get back. Stop bitching. Like, we have not necessarily seen that from him. Again, I'm not saying, I don't even know if this is necessarily good or bad, but when you see stuff like that Kobe practice thing, right, where he's like fucking yelling at Mitch Kupchak, like, how am I supposed to get better playing against these scrubs, bro? Like where he's almost challenging these guys to be better, like in an almost like challenging their level, right? Like, hey, like, you're not good enough. This isn't good enough. And is that good or bad? That can be.
I mean, we saw what happened in Minnesota with Butler, right?
Right. So it's not always good. There's you got to balance those things. But I do think again, this to me is not a knock on Brunson, because I don't view him as somebody who is not willing to be a leader. Like
he'll do anything it takes to win. Yeah.
Right. This is not a. I'm not going down the slander Carmelo path, but Carmelo openly talked like he never really wanted to be a leader. He just wanted to play the game, go home, right? Like
Durant too, right? I would say that he wants to hoop, right? So
yeah, but like I don't think Brunson I think understands that he has to be a leader, and he's willing to take that on his shoulders. I do think there's a type of leadership though that he doesn't exhibit that has value potentially, and can he be someone that is better about kind of like be like holding guys to account? Maybe.
I mean, I think it's like, the things you hear about these guys doing, right, in the off season, right? I mean, in The Last Dance, there's a story that Michael Jordan literally went to Vegas to pick up Rodman right after like his little sabbatical, right? Kobe showing up at 1:30 in the morning or whatever when Gasol just got off his flight when he was traded, right, to tell him like, we're here to win a championship, right? Those kind of things, like those are the stories you hear, right? Duncan, I think, was a more stoic leader, but you had a lot of guys in that locker room, especially with once they started winning, who could do that. In the early days, you had David Robinson, right? He still wasn't completely washed, being able to do that, right? So that's the kind, and it might be a little bit more difficult with Brunson because these are his friends, right? Like if Josh Hart's his best friend, like you don't want to it can be challenging, right? Especially not to sound old man at the clouds right now, but this might be a thing where today, like the younger guys are all friends with each other, right? They push back, I think, a lot against the stodgy, like hard ass culture, right? Even a guy like Brunson might not, he puts that on himself. We know that he was raised by a '90s player, a '90s Knick, and so on himself he might put that, but doing that, might be a little bit uncomfortable. But I do think, yeah, like there can be a value at times in getting guys out of their comfort zone, and maybe there's probably a balance, and Brunson might be especially equipped to do it because he is like, he is more of a, he has that personal relationship with these guys, and then he can do it maybe tactfully. But shaking it up when you're kind of, I don't want to use the word rut because they're 40 and 23. They haven't really let go of the rope at any point. But I think this offseason, I'm curious what there's going to have to be a transfer. I mean, I think with Bridges is the guy, right? I think Cat, you're still going to, they're going to have to, Cat, I think, is a little bit of a coaching thing. You're going to have to figure out more creative ways when teams, put wings on him, figure out how to, get him a little bit better on the drive, drive versus shoot or post up decisions. I think there's probably some opportunity to get him to lean into his passing a little bit more out of the post or out of drives. That might not be something he has, but it's really Bridges that I think is an inflection point, because let me ask you this, right? Like the question is, you traded 5 picks for a role player. That's, I don't want to relitigate that. I think the hope, you have to think there's some hope that he can ascend a little bit and take some pressure off Brunson. Cat, for all his, his skill, isn't, he's best when he can play off guys, right? Like a KP on steroids on offense. I think Porzingis is obviously a much better defender. But Bridges is that perimeter Robin that right now he's not quite being. I think he still might have a lower usage than OG, or it's comparable. Do you think that's just something he doesn't have in him, maybe? And how would beyond? I think we've talked about the adjustments Thibs can make, right? But in terms of this, how do you kind of unlock that in him? I mean, I'll start with this. Like, this guy just doesn't go to the rim. He has nice touch at the rim. I've seen him make some pretty finishes. I've seen him throw down dunks. You see the guy avoid contact. Do you think he's worried about his Iron Man streak? Do you think this just isn't something how he's wired or has the skill? Perez has talked about the issues with passing quite a bit. Curious your thoughts, because like I think that's eventually something, even if they fix the defensive issues and stuff, eventually they're going to need Bridges to be a forceful player. And that's not to not. I think he's played reasonably well this season. The shooting has been a little bit up and down. His defense has been a lot better than he's gotten credit for. But given the cost is the cost, given those things and given what the Knicks need, I'm curious if you think he has that in him and how you bring that out.
I think that me and Press talked about this in the last pod. I think he is not a guy, like, if you want to get, but first of all, you have to make a serious attempt to get the most out of Bridges. I don't think Thibs has made a serious attempt to do that. You can't trade 5 first-round picks for the guy and then constantly, kind of with how you're designating roles, have him be like the 4th or 5th most important player in your lineup offensively. That's a joke. And if I was the front office, I'd be pretty furious about that. Second, like when I'm saying like you need to make a genuine attempt, like you need to actually understand who this player is. This is not Dante, bro. Like you can't just be like he's not gonna get extreme usage in the ways that Dante is. Like if Dante was here right now in place of Bridges, I'm 100% sure we'd be getting more value out of him right now, just because it's easier for Dante to get his shots off in the type of way that Bridges is being used than it is for Bridges. That's just reality. And Bridges is a different player. He's not going to be some high volume, psycho shooter from three. He's not going to be able to just launch quick trigger from 27, 28 feet off the catch. That's not how he's wired. You need to be more willing to draw up actions for him, blend in actions for him off of primary stuff, so that he's not going up against the, against the top situation in some ways. And I don't think that's been done. Now, Bridges himself needs to be more assertive, but I think if you want him to play, like, he's clearly playing below a level that he's shown before in his career. And I think it's interesting how, like, last year you could feel kind of his spirit disappearing in Brooklyn. And I don't think that spirit has returned yet in New York. And it's just really frustrating.
You don't think the power of friendship just brings that back?
I don't think you're getting, I know you're making a joke, but seriously, like, no, I don't. Like, I don't think the power of friendship, I don't think why Dante, yes, I'm sure it helped Dante's confidence that, Josh Hart's here and Brunson's here and whatever, they have like some understanding on and off the court together. But like, if you're Bridges, you're coming to a new team, you have this huge price tag on you. Okay. Like, he knows what everybody paid for him. The fact that Josh Hart has even kind of like talked about it openly and joked about it speaks to the fact that they're aware of the conversation that has been ongoing since that trade was made. If your coach is not doing much to like make you a priority within the offense, while also asking you to effectively like constantly cover for Karl-Anthony Towns with very little help, like, yeah, I think it's gonna affect you, and you're gonna lose some spirit, you're gonna lose confidence, and you're not gonna be, maybe maxing out your hardest. Like, I don't think he's mailing in his effort, but I'd be lying to you if I think that I said that he's playing his absolute hardest all the time. I think there are times we've seen it, and a lot of the times, if you notice, when that's the case, it's usually when his offense is going, when he's in a rhythm, when he's kind of part of the game plan. And when he's not is usually when we have some of these more poor defensive efforts. So I don't know. I think, and I gotta say this, like, people were bitching about his defense against the Lakers. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, we gave up 99 points to them in regulation. I'm sorry, like, yeah, if you're expecting perfection here, then that's a higher bar than
their wings
anybody
aren't
on
really
this team has shown, quite
offense.
frankly.
Their wings aren't really driving the offense.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah, right. But it's just like, I think that people get upset with the offense and then they immediately like, I think his defense has been pretty good for a while now. Like, yeah, are there games where it's not great? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question about that. But there are also instances where it's perfectly good. It's solid. It's above average. It's well above average. It's you know what I mean? Like, he's actually moving the needle, but he doesn't get credit for it because people are so upset about the offense. And I get like being upset about the offense, but conflating all of that together is a mistake. And then the last thing I'll say is, like, I see people complaining all the time about the rebounding. It's like, dude, if you thought this guy was he's been a poor rebounder forever. Forever, he's been a poor rebounder. That's just it. Like, it's not going to change. He's not going to become a good rebounder. His presence on the glass is not going to change. He's a bad rebounder. This is just reality. So you got to accept
that. Yeah. So a couple things. I mean, like, I think part of it is like, it's the lack of kind of the force he plays with. I think some of the things he does are really underappreciated. Like, the times when he's really been able to go off, he hunts shots off ball. Like, his off ball movement, I would say it's the best on the team right now. You could say Dante's better just because, Dante had way more space to operate in and had more just a wider field to play in, so to speak. I'm not saying there's a spacing issue. I'm just saying Bridges doesn't have that kind of range and versatility from the perimeter. But he's cutting in. He can make these off balance mid range shots. I think what is concerning to me and why I agree with you on Thibs. You need to suck it up and manage to the player that you have. But when you constantly when you're so good at getting paint touches, we've talked about this. They have a lot of guys who are good at getting paint touches that can't generate much gravity off of them. Campaign is great at actually getting to the rim or getting to the paint, getting that little floater area, not drawing doubles, and he's not getting the line really. And Campaign is 6'3", 6'4". It is what it is. Like that's just he does the best with what he's got. With Bridges, with his size and his length and his ability to finish when he gets there, he doesn't seek out contact. He seems to, he'll fight over screens, but even that is probably one of the weaker points of his defensive game. I think that can be frustrating, right? When you're talking about a team-wide kind of lack of physicality and force, and it shows up on the glass too. I don't know if you think that's a fair critique, but I would highlight that. The other thing I would say is, so they did play their first game without Brunson on Friday, and Bridges had 22 points, 8 of 12. Actually got to the line 6 times. Only took 1 3, but did you think that some of that creation was unlocked? So one, do you kind of agree on the physicality aspect, and is there a way to kind of get that out of him? And two, with that Clippers game, the first, not the first time they played without Brunson, but the first of this stretch where he's going to be out for a few games at least, did you see Bridges start to maybe impose himself a little bit more?
A little bit more. It was good to see him get to the line 6 times, obviously drive to the paint. But like, honestly, I just don't take much from it, because until Thibs is serious about getting him involved when Brunson is available, it doesn't matter. Like, the fact that he's actually regressed in terms of his importance when Brunson sits, like the bench stuff, I don't get. Like, they don't make him a priority when the bench is in, when Brunson's off the floor, and it's like they don't even really utilize him in that sense. So no, it doesn't mean anything to me. It's good to see, and hopefully it gives him more confidence and whatever. But there's no, until I see an actual intention to what they're doing when Brunson is back, when they're at full strength and they have everybody available, no, I don't take much from
it. I mean, and do you think this lack of physicality, I mean, it's extreme this year, right? There's some crazy Bridges free throw stats. But then you talk about the rebounding. You talk about, while he's very good at staying in his spot, not the most physical defender. Is he protecting his Iron Man streak? Do you think there's something there that can change? And does it need to?
I mean, he's never been like some highly physical player. I mean, I understand the free throw thing is extremely weird and even odd for him. But no, I don't take much from it. Like, I don't know what you're necessarily trying for, I guess is how I'd put it. Like, I mean, are you?
Well, no one's saying it needs to be, Julius Randle, right? But get in the fight a little bit, right? Like when you have
make him a bigger part of the game plan. I guarantee you, make him a bigger part of the game plan. All of a sudden, you're going to see all that stuff dial up. And until they do that, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not going to get super upset with the guy who has basically been minimized and marginalized as much as you possibly could with him for a marquee acquisition, kind of floating. And because I don't think he knows what he's supposed to be doing a lot of times.
Yeah, and
that's what, like, I don't think he has any confidence about what his role. Like, how can I have confidence in what I am doing if my coach he's not showing any confidence in me? Like, I think it's, and look, it can be a circle, right, of just kind of like a self-fulfilling cycle here of Thibs doesn't believe in him, so he doesn't have confidence, but he doesn't have confidence because Thibs doesn't believe in him, and it's like, what's the right thing there?
So there's a lack of confidence in getting shots, but he doesn't have an issue getting shots up. They just all come on these mid-range fadeaways, right? And I think that's particularly frustrating. It's like once in a while, like Brunson takes a lot of mid-range shots. He leveraged those into fouls, right? We can get into an argument about whether it's ethical or whatever, right? But once you get into that paint area, once you have this weapon, which I do think, to be clear, he's a very good mid-range shooter, Bridges. He's actually worked on it. I think that's where the form change came from, is he wants to be able to use that length as a weapon. Pause. But, it's you can leverage that to do other things. And those are the things where it's like, I can't just put that all on Thibs, because it's not like you don't shoot. It's not just a lack of confidence. I think there are stretches where like he's floating. I get that. But I do think like that's something like they need him. They don't, again, he doesn't have to be throwing his body into guys, but with his skill set, there's an opportunity to improve there. We've talked a lot about Bridges. We talked about kind of needing to shake up a little bit. I do want to talk about, so you brought up Thibs. It's a topic that's gotten, I think that's frankly been beaten to death, the Thibs conversation. Just online, it feels like people are like, there isn't a space to talk about, I think that online you have people saying the Knicks wouldn't be here without Thibs. He's not a bad coach. There's people who say he's the worst coach ever. I think that, the middle ground, I think where we're both at is obviously he's really built a culture here. Without Thibs, without Thibs, they probably don't have the amount of success they've had, right? Maybe there's other coaches, but there are very few who could have come into the situation he did. Year one, get a 4 seed, develop those young guys, create the structure for them to develop in, have all the success. I think Brunson had the talent to blow up, but credit Thibs for again, allowing that to happen. Maybe he's not the guy to get you over the top. I think that's like, we've said a lot about that. I do think, I'll just add this, right? If you're saying that, well, the roster is flawed, you can't put it on Thibs at this point in year 5, I don't think that's an excuse. And if you say they wouldn't be here without Thibs, they also wouldn't be here without Leon Rose. So are you saying that Rose is the problem? The same logic applies, right? But the Knicks did lose Johnny Bryant from, I'm not talking about Johnny Bryant needs to come back and replace Thibs or whatever. Those are conversations that'll happen in the future if it comes to that. But, how much do you think they've missed his presence? Maybe he's one of those voices, right, that could get Josh to lock in, that could, build a player's confidence when maybe Thibs is going away from him or isn't giving him that attention or whatever.
The Johnny Bryant question, I think, is actually pretty interesting. It's been more interesting as the season has progressed, I think, in terms of, I didn't initially take or think much of it, but I think you've kind of seen some erosion of some of the principles that served the Knicks well over the years, or the last few years. Like, I think their spacing in terms of their discipline with it is worse. Now, is that all because of Johnny Bryant? Obviously not. But that slippage has come as Cleveland's kind of like principles of spacing, even with multiple non-shooters, has been excellent, right? Really, really good. And even though they're starting Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, they're a high 3-point attempt rate team. And I don't know. I just think that it's interesting to look at that. As far as, is he somebody who can give guys confidence that Thibs that's not his thing? Very possible. And the person I would kind of talk about, or the example I would use would be if we remember, like Randall talked about this, right? How Johnny Bryant visited him and he was like, would you have wanted to be your teammate last year? Like, that was a huge conversation. We know that like he worked really well and closely with guys like Quickly and RJ Barrett. Thibs is not like I'm going to put my arm around you and like worry about your feelings type of coach, which is fine. Like, that you don't need to be. That's just like, you need different coaches for different things, right? Like, certain assistants are there for that. Certain head coaches are good with that. Certain assistants are more about X's and O's, whatever it is. Different coaches have different things. But I do think they've lost something on that coaching staff, and we can debate what it is. we'll never know, right? Because we're not behind the scenes. We don't know what each coach is kind of responsible for. But I do think that you see, I don't think I see a coach that talks to Thibs nearly as often as we saw Johnny Bryant kind of communicate with him. I don't think, and then you look at some of the slippage in certain categories, and then as you mentioned, like some of the stuff with confidence with Mikal Bridges and whatever, and maybe like Josh Hart shooting threes and things of that nature. Maybe there is something to that.
Yeah, I mean, there might, it could be many things. It could be another voice on the bench that Thibs respects and is willing to adapt and listen to. I think Thibs does use his assistants, but Bryant, you look at the guys on the bench, it's Maurice Cheeks, it's Brunson. In terms of kind of that newer, innovative kind of thinking, maybe they're not giving that balance that Bryant brought. We do know he had really good relationships with the players. Like what we were talking about before, which you just alluded to as well. Like he could be the guy to get in someone's face, or not, maybe tactfully, but to send a message that, like, yeah, Bridges, you can do more than this, right? If you're worried about Thibs not using you, I get it, but in those opportunities, and Deuce talked about this last year, right? Like those garbage time minutes, right? It would have been very easy for Deuce to say, I'm only getting garbage time minutes. Quickly's entrenched as the sixth man, and even he doesn't get many minutes. I'm 2 places behind, a budding superstar. What does garbage time matter? But he used that as, I think he told this to one of the rookies. Was it Kolak maybe? That those garbage time minutes are how you earn.
It was short. It was to Huck Purdy.
Yeah, it was Huck Purdy. How you earn and create those opportunities. And I would imagine that it helped to, and Deuce, I think, from being, a 3-star recruit, within 2 years, he improved every year at West Virginia, became a first-round pick. He's improved every year in the league. The creation, I think, just is what it is. It's never going to come. But, you've seen that about a lot of guys. And I think Thibs is good at creating a good environment. I'm certainly not suggesting that there's some stagnancy with this rookie class. Dadier, we knew as a project.
You can't expect
development.
You just can't expect development to happen like immediately.
Linearly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that you can take much from what we're seeing, and I don't mean that in a good or bad way. Like it's just,
well, I would, in a good way, I would say Huck Purdy, like the fact that he's become viable. It sucks that he got injured. So I think that in that sense, it doesn't. But I think, yeah, like even the guys who are a little bit older, who need, some kind of a push or some kind of an individual attention. I think Thibs is known for creating, that teamwork. He'll get on guys. He wants everyone to be detailed. He's very prepared. These are the things you hear about Thibs. But Bryant has really excelled in those one-on-one relationships, right? Donovan Mitchell has talked about this. I think guys on the Knicks have talked about it. Yeah. And, maybe that's something you're missing. And obviously, for Brunson, he obviously has a very personal relationship with an assistant coach on the team. But, especially some of these newer guys, newer acquisitions, Cat, Bridges, building that confidence. A guy like Cat, I think, I don't want to say, look, I don't want to say he's high maintenance. I think the guy has exhibited a lot of growth throughout his career. He's talked about it. How, second times with Thibs, it's on both sides, they've adjusted and they have a much better relationship than what happened in Minnesota. But he does seem to be a guy, he gets frustrated during games. He just arguing with the refs and those kind of things. And, to the extent it might have improved with Randall, I wonder how much Bryant had to do with that. And I wonder how much he would help a guy like Cat, when teams are using unorthodox strategies, when he's, not getting a good whistle, when things are not going well, kind of keeping him balanced and all of that. But I think, that's all very speculative. And I don't want to suggest that Thibs doesn't give these guys individual attention. necessarily. I can't speak to that besides what I've heard from players, and some of them, frankly, might have an axe to grind at times. But I think that, I don't think it's unfair to point out that the team seems to be a little bit stuck in a way that maybe it hasn't been in the past, and guys are a little bit up and down with their confidence, with the exception of Brunson and Hart. I think how he's going to, he had 20 rebounds 2 nights ago. What he's going to give you, but guys like OG, especially guys who are newer to kind of the fabric, you wonder how much Bryant might have helped there. And you wondered how, when Thibs kind of gets stuck or can't see, maybe, it's not even that Thibs is just stubborn or refusing. Yet there's a lot to worry about as a coach, right? Like all of these different things. What are the lineups? Who's healthy?
Sometimes you need people. Sometimes you need people to point
you
stuff
need like
out
another set of eyes, right? And we'll see. I don't think people were particularly inspired by the Maurice Cheeks hiring. I think with Rick Brunson, he might be a good assistant coach. I think there is a fair amount of, if with a different last name, is he on this team? Maybe not.
I mean, I think we can be pretty straightforward here. Like, I don't think he'd be on another NBA team's bench.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to I don't know the individual roles of these assistants, but you do wonder, a guy who seemed, Brian has been on the Jazz, and he was a hot name at the time as a coach, one of the best hires, I think, that Leon Rose and Thibs, you got to give him credit as well, brought on. And then obviously goes, I mean, it's not just him in Cleveland, right? The whole team, it was a melding of a lot of things. Mobley improving, Atkinson has really energized the team. It's tough not to notice, though, that this guy, pretty much everywhere he goes, teams win.
Well, I actually think, like, I've seen a lot of this where it's like, well, the reason that, and it's kind of interesting conversation, because I see a lot, when I've brought up, like, hey, like, Cleveland wasn't close. They looked dead in the water 2 years ago after they made their big move for Donovan Mitchell. And even after last year, people were like, yeah, maybe not dead in the water after last year, but the idea was this version of the roster was not good enough. They needed to make, you can't have both Allen and Mobley. Maybe Garland and Mitchell aren't best suited to playing together. And like now, like, and you mentioned, yeah, Mobley has improved individually for sure. Garland has improved individually for sure. And that's 100% part of why they have improved and leveled up as a team. But I don't think that's the biggest reason. I think the biggest reason is how well they have blended all these different skill sets together, because you could see Mobley playing really well last year when Allen would be off the floor, right? Like, when Allen wasn't healthy, Mobley would play really well. And you could always see Mitchell would be better when Garland was out. Garland would be better when Mitchell was out. So it's not so much to me that they're individually better, and more that they are able to be individually great while they're all on the floor together. And that is the difference to me between our Knicks and them. And like, and them, actually, like, I think they're our closest parallel in terms of a team that is clearly talented, clearly has a lot of good, high quality NBA players, but consistently feels below the contention level and feels like less than the sum of their parts. And, is that about Johnny Bryant? I have no fucking idea. But to your point, he consistently fields, like, he consistently is on the bench for teams that play above expectations, that have a sense of, that play cohesively and have a clear identity offensively. Like, that's probably the weirdest thing. Like, our identity this year offensively feels very much like, I think we have an identity, but the identity is just Brunson and Cat doing shit and guys playing off of it. And while, Thibs' offense in the past have never been free flowing and beautiful team play, I think there was a lot more togetherness the last few years in their play than how it feels right now, where it just feels like disjointed and not put together and not focused. And, look, I want to be very clear about this too. We can't, and I don't think either of us is saying this, but this is not like, the credit obviously has to go to Kenny Atkinson, right? That's who the lion's share of credit has to go to. But you can't, like, if you're the lead assistant now on multiple teams that are really good, have very promising kind of like nerd stuff going on, right? Shot distribution, shot chart, all those type of things. Um, that has a clear vision, clear idea of how they're playing, you're probably doing something right, is what I would say.
Yeah. And I mean, look, how much credit do you want to give Bryant to individual improvement on the roster? On the one hand, I mean, I think Mobley got Tim Duncan comps pretty early in his career. Maybe those were far fetched, but this is a guy who could have been the number one pick in his draft class, right? I would put him still at number two. I think Cade's ascension this year puts him ahead of Mobley, but the fact that it's a debate says that this is a really elite talent. And maybe this, what is it, year 3, year 4, whatever it is, like it's not unreasonable to expect this kind of jump from a level of talent like that. But it seems like a lot of the guys are playing with more confidence, right? Mitchell, on the one hand, Donovan Mitchell's numbers have gone down, but he's been able to turn it up when needed. I don't think you should get all NBA over Brunson, but guys seem to be very comfortable. That's probably in part to Atkinson. That's probably, as we've talked about, the continuity and health and all of these things coming together. But again, it's not the first team where Bryant's been a part of that kind of a change. And it might be worth looking at voices on the bench. There's other guys, there's other assistants the Knicks have bled that frankly, you wonder,
Right.
right?
And it's guys that, right. And it's also like, people always like, yeah, Mike Woodson hasn't been the greatest coach at Indiana, but just because you're not the greatest head coach doesn't mean you didn't do a good job as an assistant, right? Like it's like the Peter principle, right? Just because you're a great assistant, you might not be a great head coach. Like Kenny Payne was a really good assistant, one of the worst head coach hires of the last like half decade in college basketball. But yeah, I think that yeah, to your point, like there's been a lot of whereas in the front office we haven't experienced that, right? On the coaching staff, we've definitely have.
Yeah. So there's other guys, like you look at a guy like Mike Woodson. It hasn't gone quite as.
Bryant's gone, Kenny Payne's gone, Mike Woodson's gone. Things like
Yeah. So you look at a guy like Woodson, went to Indiana. He said he's gonna. He said he's retiring at the end of the career. He's leaving Indiana at any rate. You can maybe look at that as the kind of guy. I think as an assistant coach, he's had a lot of success. Specifically, some of the things you're talking about. He's a forceful voice. He's gotten players to adapt. Got the most successful season out of Melo here, and I mean, I do think Carmelo Anthony changed the way he played. Right, he was more willing passer. He bought into playing the 4 that year. The defense, kind of came and went. But Woodson, really got a lot of that team, and they had veteran leaders. He put in a pretty solid defensive system around, even on defense, right? We know Thibs is a really smart guy, but he can help to have another guy in the room say, Woodson said the East is big, but he was willing to play Carmelo at the 4. He's willing to play some of these older, slower guards and manage around it, right? So, you do wonder how much, we put a lot of this on Thibs, but, are the other voices in that locker room, are they, does he have the right people around him? I imagine Leon Rose will take a look at that this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, they have to look. The coaching it's inevitable. Like this is going to be a conversation at this stage. I see this with the Bills now all the time, right? Where it's like, oh, well, we're not getting over the top. So at some point, like being really good all the time isn't good enough. Like we need somebody who's going to get us over the top. And it's really hard because what Thibs has done, the floor he gives you in a lot of ways, it's when you've been a franchise that has been in the wilderness in the past for as long as the Knicks were, you it feels like it's nice, right? To know like, all right, this coach is not, he's going to always have us at least look like a competent outfit on the floor over the course of a regular season, even if maybe the championship ceiling isn't there. But it's year 5 of having the coach. And you now know the things that he is good at. And you're also completely familiar with the things that he's not great at and the things that he lacks in. And, how, and it's like, at the end of the day, I think you can add more to the assistant coaching staff for sure. And I think if they retain Thibs, that would be, I would think that would be a point of emphasis. But how much can an assistant actually change as far as like responsibility in ultimately making the decisions in game, tactically adjustments, all those rotation subs to elevate your ceiling as a team? And that's ultimately where I think like we are as a franchise right now, where we're not, maybe not as a franchise, but at least as us as fans, where that's kind of the common question that we are having, these conversations we're having constantly of like, does Thibs have that level in him? And, how much has he adapted? How much has he changed? And the slippage we've seen in certain areas this year, the 3-point stuff is a little concerning. And the fact that defensively, look, the last 2 games, I want to say this because I've been super critical of him on the post games that I've done and obviously previously, but the last 2 games defensively, I thought were really, really encouraging from a tactical perspective, where it didn't feel like we were just playing drop and not adjusting and all this type of, like, there was no focus. We didn't know what we were trying to do or not do. I think that looked really different in the last 2 games. So that's really encouraging to me. But offensively, there's still just such a lack of, I don't want to say modernity because I think that's kind of cheap, but it doesn't feel like we're operating with the same type of vision and playbook offensively as what the best teams in the NBA are striving for. And that is where I have really big concerns about Thibs. Even going back to last season where the offense was great in the playoffs, it was a little like, well, was the offense great because of Thibs' strategy, or was it great because, look, you didn't play contenders, right? You played Philly, you played Indiana. These are teams that were not contenders. In Indiana's case, a brutally awful defensive team last season. Defensive team last season. Like, was that really enough to show that Thibs has learned and now he will be able to construct an offense that can compete against contenders over the course of a 7-game series and in multiple playoff series? I don't know. And then the evidence we've seen this year, right? When they play Boston, when they've played Cleveland, when they've played OKC, especially the second time around in all those matchups, you have real big questions on top of, does he even really fully get, like, I kind of want to wrap on this because I think this is an interesting concept. When we've talked in the past about like, hey, don't start Precious, because what do you like when you start Precious with Cat, right? So let's say when OG is out or Hart is out or whoever, right? When you're starting Precious with Cat, you're playing big, right? So what's the bet you're making there? We're gonna own the defensive glass, and we're gonna be strong, or not even just the defensive glass, but the glass in general, and we're gonna be a strong defensive team. Neither of those has been the case. Okay, so when you have a sample size that tells you this is not good, and we have a sample size going back to last year where it wasn't good, even along Hartenstein, if you suggest, right, well, just start Deuce, right? Put Deuce in there. You'll often get pushback from people being like, that's too small. Like, these teams are going to take advantage of you. That's like, you can't beat Boston that way. And maybe you can't beat Boston that way. Maybe you can't beat Cleveland that way. Maybe you can't beat OKC that way. I don't know. What I know is that those lineups are better on the floor, even if they're worse on the defensive glass or at rebounding in general. They're better offensively. They're better defensively. They give you a better chance. Like, and that to me is where I have my biggest questions with Thibs, where it's like, do you make your choices based on what you wish was true versus what is true? What is actually happening on the floor with these various options you have? And we've seen throughout his career when he has to make the choice between, okay, I have to adjust and I have to make some, I have a choice, I have an imperfect choice either way. He will err on the side of size over skill or whatever, even if the indicators in terms of offensive rating, defensive rating, shot profile, whatever, like even if all the indicators are telling you the smaller option, the smaller guard option is the superior option, right? I mean, this is the same conversation we had for multiple years regarding Emmanuel Quickly with this team. Like, oh, you can't play him and Brunson together, like because they're too small. And it's like, all right, maybe they are too small, and maybe you're not going to beat Boston like that, or whatever contender X in those years. Maybe you're not going to beat those teams like that, but you're not going to beat them with just playing the bigger guy either, because those lineups are worse. So play your best lineup and see what happens. And I don't know that he will ever get to the point where he feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the success of the Rose front office in general is, we talked about, there's many voices in the room. There's specialization, but I think they all have input, right? And Rose's superpower, I think, is, you look at Rose, he's not a basketball guy in the strictest sense, right? He's an agent. You look at, he knows contracts, he knows relationships. But his superpower is that he can have a guy like Walt Perrin in the room, give him, the basketball evaluation. He can have Worldwide West, understanding maybe a little bit deeper, like about these players, about, off the court and kind of the work ethic and those kind of things, as well as helping with managing relationships. He has Aller, who knows the cap, knows the implications, kind of has his finger on the pulse of trends and valuation and all that. And the flexibility, and it's been really good that he's been able to weigh all these things. And I think Thibs probably benefited from that as well. I know the other thing is that, like, these coaches who are long tenured, I guess here's the question, right? Have there been other Thibs assistants that have had success, right? You talk about a coach's coaching tree, right? Mm-hmm. You wonder, should Rose be taking a more active role? Maybe I don't know if the Bryant hire was Thibs' idea or if that was kind of coming from the front office, whatever. Is it typical for front offices to take a more active role? And do you think that that's something Thibs might need in selecting the assistants?
I mean, he didn't build his first staff on his own, right? Like, it's pretty obvious Johnny Bryant, he had no connection to Johnny Bryant. That was clearly a front office selection. He had no connection to Mike Woodson. That was clearly a front office thing. And maybe even like Mike Woodson has spent time with the organization before, right? So, and Scott Perry was still with the team. I mean, actually, no, he never overlapped with Scott Perry. Either way, Mike Woodson was clearly more of an organizational front office selection. Kenny Payne, very clearly, a front office selection. But you also let him pick guys like Darren Erman's guys he's worked with before. Dice, obviously, a guy he's worked with before. It's like, I think it's very common, actually, I think, for a front office to get involved, and not just involved, but it's a collaborative thing. Like, hey, look, this is a guy we think can really help you. He's good at XYZ things. Like the video assistant guys that do the review stuff for him. There's zero chance Thibs picked those guys. Like, zero shot. Thibs was like, oh yeah, I love the way this guy can fucking crunch the numbers and figure out what's a good challenge and what's a bad challenge. Like, that's very obviously coming from Leon and or whoever in the organization is responsible for that. So I don't think it's certainly not out of the norm for the Knicks, and it's not really out of the norm at this point across the league. I think we've seen Golden State has built their coaching staffs differently over the years, and that's clearly had input from the front office. But sure, like you're not going to impose a coach on him. Like, if he's like, I fucking hate this guy, you're not going to be like, no, fuck you. He's on your staff now, no matter what. Golden State did do that with Mark Jackson, where they were just like, nah, we're going to have this guy who's going to spy on you on staff. He's going to report back to us. But like, yeah, I think it's fine to have input from the front office side. It's actually probably a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, or you can say, Woodson was brought in as like D'Antoni's assistant, but it, ended up being the coach in waiting. I don't think you need that, um, but I think, like, if we've learned something, the way this organization seems to have flourished is with kind of a diversity of opinions, and kind of the executive, instead of being a guy who has his focus, being able to, and I think this is a model that works pretty well in a lot of sports, right? People are probably tired of me talking about this team, but yeah, the Eagles have a head coach who, has been criticized heavily. And then they hired two elite coordinators. And, he still, they said, how's it going to work? What is he actually going to do? Well, he weighs their inputs and makes decisions on the overall game plan. And then that worked for, and now you can say they had a ridiculously talented roster, took advantage of many things. But, you see it at, you saw it in college football, right? Michigan's rise wasn't the most talented team until they won it. But even then, like, they don't recruit better. And they had an offensive coach who took kind of a step back and really gave more to his assistants, and was kind of, it's kind of without getting into a debate about the merits of tech CEOs. There's this quote right in the Steve Jobs movie with Michael Fassbender where he says, like, Wozniak, or Seth Rogen's character, asks him, like, what do you do? You're not a coder. You're not, play any instrument. He says, I play the orchestra, right? However much you want to believe that's tech propaganda, I get it. But I do think in sports, we've seen these guys who are more generalists that can weigh different pieces of information and synthesize that, as opposed to just having, and that probably frees Thibs to take a little bit of this bigger picture view, right? If he has assistants that are focused on these aspects, if he has a guy like Johnny Bryan who's focused on, these are the kind of areas where we have opportunities on offense, this is how this player is developing. He doesn't have to spend as much time on that. He can think 1,000 feet instead of being kind of caught in the minutiae of these games where you might be losing. We call it stubbornness, but it genuinely could be like, I'm thinking of 10 different things, not about whether I need to run a pick and roll from Mikal Bridges, right? So I think that, assistant coach could go a long way. I think neither of us, Brunson will come back. We'll see how they do in the playoffs. They might be able to avoid Boston in the second round at this point if Milwaukee continues to close the gap.
Yesterday worked out about as well as it could have for the Knicks. The Pistons lost, the Pacers lost, the Bucks lost. So yeah, the gap is still what it is. The Knicks have, I think we played Milwaukee once more this year. We already have the season series. Like, we had the season series against them. We have the season series.
They might buck the trend,
Pacers.
but yeah.
Fuck off, man.
The Pacers might be pacing themselves.
The Pistons are the one team we don't have the season series advantage on, but I think we play them one more time. So, we'll see how that goes.
Are you, of those teams, we're probably not going to face the Bucks. Of those teams, well, you never know, right? Of those teams that the Knicks could face in the first round, is there one that you're more worried about than the others?
Probably most worried about the Pacers, or not the Pacers. Actually, I don't know. I don't know, man. This team is so weird. I think if I had to pick one, though, I would probably pick the Pacers, just because I think Carlisle. Like, I'm not worried about Doc Rivers in a fucking playoff series. I'm not really worried about JB Bickerstaff in a playoff series. As good as Detroit is, I still don't trust their. Like, they have one ball handler that is like worth something. So I ultimately still think there's. We see this all the time, right? Like, it takes a special player to be your best ball handler, like your only ball handler, really, and your offense to function in the playoffs at a high level. Like, Brunson is at that level. Do I think Cade is at that level? I don't know. I think I gotta say, I think Cade, I think his ceiling is much higher now than I thought coming into the season. I thought he was going to be a good player. I think there's still a chance for him to become like a top 15, 10 type player, which I didn't think coming into the season. Do I think he's at that level now, though?
Many people would say he is, but yeah.
But yeah, I don't think he is this year. He's been really good, though. He's been great. He'll probably make All NBA, and he deserves it. With obviously all the qualifications of, like, certain guys won't be able to be selected because they didn't play enough games. But like, he deserves it. Yeah, no, he could. But yeah, Cade's been great. But do I think he's at the level where if he's the only ball handler you have, in a playoff series where teams are super hyper focused on you and there's a higher attention to detail and all that type of stuff. Do I think that he can? Do I feel good about the Knicks winning that series? Yeah, absolutely. The Pacers are different for me because obviously they beat us last year in the playoffs, but I do think Rick Carlisle is a better tactical coach in terms of being quick on his feet and making adjustments, and learning game to game and changing things game to game, than Thibs, and that always worries me. And we know the issues at times that Karl Anthony Towns has defensively. I think that's something that Carlisle would be able to pick on ruthlessly. I mean, he was able to pick on Hartenstein ruthlessly last year, right? And Hartenstein is a significantly better defensive player than Karl Anthony Towns. So that would concern me. That's probably the matchup I like the least among that group. But yeah,
that's interesting to me. I definitely agree on the coaching aspect. But to the point about, in two of those series, the Knicks will have the best player on the floor. Arguably the best two players on the floor.
I don't even think it's arguable. They'll have the best two players on the floor in all the series that they be in.
No, not the Bucks. They won't even have the best player on the floor if they play the Bucks.
Yeah, they will. But they'd have they'd have two of the three best. Is what I meant to say. That's
but they would not have the best player on the floor.
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't.
Two, and Giannis is not the only ball.
I actually was just baiting you to have to give Giannis credit.
I mean, no, it's I jokes aside, I do think there are limitations in terms of his offensive skill set. I do not think the Knicks have a way to exploit that this season, at least. I think I'd still expect us to win, but that is a guy who could swing a series on his own. And Damian Lillard is not quite the player he once was. He's still a pretty damn good player. There are roster flaws, and Rivers is not a great coach, but I don't know that Thibs is going to maximize getting those. But I think he probably would do a better job than Rivers. But I'd still have those three teams. The fact that Giannis is on the Bucks, they would have to me be the scariest. And then just the way the Pistons play it's given the Knicks some problems. I could definitely see the Pistons taking two. And then I think Pacers, it's less about the personnel, and one, it kind of is about the personnel because they go legitimately 5 out. I think Miles Turner has become reasonably underrated. I think Cat should be able to have a lot of success, especially if Indiana tries putting some of their wings on him, and the Knicks should have a lot of offensive success. But we've seen that with the Pacers, where even when they played Boston last year, Boston won in 5 games. There are a lot of tight games where Boston's defense is good, and the Pacers kind of can score on anyone. So there's a lot of variance there. So I think that I'd still go with the Bucks, but I think I would agree with a lot of the sentiments you shared about the Pacers. But let's say they're able to get through the first round, get exposed in the second round. This seems like the most likely outcome right now. To get to the next level, right? And we're at a time, personnel, either outside or just what they already have now improving. What 2 or 3 things, or is there a big trade? 2 or 3 things you would say are most crucial starting now and including the offseason of how this team gets to that level where they're a true contender viewed as good as anybody else?
I think they need to figure out the center situation. This is not on Thibs. This is just the reality of the situation this year. But we need to get a sample of Cat next to Mitch, see what that looks like. And then you need to make a determination. I think it'll be good, by the way. I think it'll be very good. And the early signs we saw against the Lakers were very promising. Now, do you see that if it's really good? And do you think, okay, well, Minnesota is on the right path. And because we have Brunson, we have a better half-court initiator. We can actually use that as a template, and that's our best path to contention. You have to determine that. And then you also determine, is Mitch the guy that you want to bank on for that role, or do you want to go with something else? I thought it was interesting. Yesterday, I believe Mark Stein on his podcast said that the Knicks made a very strong push to get Walker Kessler at the trade deadline. And I have no idea what that looks like. I've no idea what they offered. They don't have a lot to trade, so I don't know what that offer might have been. But I think that's interesting and probably reveals their hand a little bit of what they're thinking.
But
and then
you think that long-term Cat should not primarily play the 5?
I think he needs to play both. That's always where I've been. He needs to play both. I don't care how you want. Like, there might be matchups where it's better for him to play 30 minutes at the 5 and 6 minutes at the 4. And there might be certain matchups where it's better for him to play 20 minutes at the 4 and 15 at the 5. Like, it just depends on the matchups and the game situation and all those type of things. But he needs to be you need somebody that allows him to play both. And then I think you also want a center who, yes, can play alongside Cat, but then can also operate as the sole big on the floor himself as well. So those are the things that I think they need. That's one thing they need to figure out. And then the other part is they need to get another guy that can reliably create in the half court. Like, as much as I'll say that I think Thibs needs to do more to get more out of Mikal Bridges, I ultimately don't think that's about Mikal Bridges becoming some type of like half court initiator, running a higher number of pick and rolls. Like, yeah, he needs to run more pick and rolls, but I think, and again, I talked about this with Prez on the podcast we did yesterday. But like, you need to be more intentional about how you get those pick and rolls, like it be it as on the second side of an action after your primary, set and those type of things. But I still think you need somebody who's more dynamic as a creator off the bench. Like Cam Payne has given you something. Like, he is a capable point guard, but he's like, to the point you made earlier, he's not somebody who gets doubles, who commands, the defense rotate to him and opens things up for other guys on the floor consistently. So who is that guy? How do they get that guy? I don't know. And then you also need to probably get you need to get another wing. Maybe that's Dadier. Maybe that's McCullough. Maybe they have that in-house. Maybe it's somebody they signed for the vet men. Who the fuck knows? But they definitely need another wing to add to the rotation. And very specifically, they need a wing or a guard or something that is a quick trigger shooter from 3 and a real distance shooter, a guy that can like space out 4 or 5 feet behind the arc, like somebody like Malik Beasley's doing that for the Pistons this year, right? So
yeah, I mean, so those
are the things they need.
Are you on that last note? I'll ask 2 questions on the last note. One, do you think TJ Warren can give them that maybe at least a little bit this year? And 2, it sounds like what you're saying is it doesn't, if you have to, wings are tough, right? Like, I think there's the kind of spacing you're talking about, there's switchability, and then there's creation, right? Typically you have to pick 1 out of 3. And so, like, when I say switchability, I really mean size, right? That's 6'7", 6'8", OG type, even Bridges, right, with his length and his size. It sounds like you would rather say, all right, if the wing, quote unquote, is 6'5", built like Quentin Grimes or Beasley, to your point, you would rather do that than get another prototype guy who like adds to the defense. That's a bigger concern to you on the wing. So yeah, 1, Warren, is there any hope for you on that? Of him making an impact, and 2, how do you think about that trade-off when you're looking at the wing they have to get?
I mean, I just think, like, you talked about watching the Celtics yesterday. I think it's instructive watching the Celtics. You need guys that keep things moving. So, like, quick decision. When Brunson forces a rotation, I get the ball. Okay, now I drive in. And then you also need somebody who is, like, I think part of the reason that starting lineup has not kind of meshed as well as you wanted it to, and also has struggled offensively heavily of late, is Josh Hart's regression in terms of not even just his percentages shooting 3, but his willingness to stay outspaced behind the line. You need to have guys that are comfortable staying outspaced behind the 3-point line.
And that affects everything else, by the way, right? When he catches and doesn't want to do anything, like when he catches and has the quick trigger, it record scratches, but it affects him personally because when they have to close out, that opens up the driving lanes, which is what he really wants to do, right? But without that threat, then you don't even have that, right? So sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, that's it though. I mean, that's really what it is. They, like, you watch Boston. If Derek White has open 3, he takes it. And if he puts it on the deck, then the other guys are spaced out. Like they keep their spacing pristine at all times, and it creates driving angles, and it makes it really hard to defend them on possessions because everybody on that team can attack a closeout and keep things moving. And like I do think there is something to Josh Hart's regression in terms of, again, his willingness to shoot threes and how teams are defending him has compounded that. And some of the struggles that we see with OG and Mikal at times, where the threshold for them is raised for how they have, like the level they have to create at because of some of the issues that you're having with Josh on the floor at this moment in time.
Yeah. I think that I think quick decisions could be because I think we've seen how challenging it is. The Knicks, for their two starting wings, really, if you include Hart, for those wings, they've given up a first this for Hart, right, and Cam Reddish. So they've given up one first there, obviously 5 firsts for Bridges, and for OG, they didn't give up a first, but so you have up quickly RJ, and then 6 firsts to get those wings, which are, I think, 3 starting level wings. Hart maybe ideally a 6th man, but he's clearly capable above average starting wing. So to get guys, it's tough, right? And we've always wanted, you ideally want, he's 6'7", can make quick decisions, can shoot threes. That just doesn't exist. I do think there's something Thibs can do to, like, you can make the game easier for guys. The game will tell you what to do, yes. But within that framework, for these guys, you don't want them to play like robots, but you can make the game easier for them a little bit, right? Not just with the sets you call, but say that if a defense is reacting to the drive this way, this is your key. This is how we're thinking about this, right? I think this is huge. And I'm reading this book about total football. So to someone like you, it's going to sound like super basic casual stuff, but like the way guys, like, based on how this guy moves, you go there, right? A lot of that is going to be coaching. I don't think it's a coincidence that Boston is operating that way. Like, Missoula deserves a lot of credit. These are, yes, heady players, but a lot of them are, and not all of them have been known as the headiest guys, right? By the way, right? Jaylen Brown hasn't necessarily been known as some great off-ball player for most of his career. He's really built that structure. So I do think that comes back to coaching. But if you're trying to get that wing and it's so difficult in this market, I do think your point about just a guy who is a quick decision guy can add more than the physical profile and just general offensive skill adds. I do think the center and, like, kind of the ball handler off the bench is a little bit easier to solve. Although, like, I think finding that ball handler is weird for the same reason we lost quickly. Because generally, if a guy is qualified to really juice the bench, they're probably qualified to be a starter, right? So we lost quickly because he's overqualified to lead that unit, even though that's something we needed. You lose a guy like, would a guy like Colin Sexton be perfect? Yeah. Is he going to be happy playing, 15 minutes a game behind Brunson? Absolutely not. He's way overqualified for that. I look at a guy like Cole Anthony, maybe as good for that role. He even defends pretty well for his size. Not sure about his availability. I think he's a better defender than Campaign. You're not a Cole Anthony guy? I mean, for the role you described,
I think he doesn't. I don't think he has gravity like that. I think I would rather roll the dice on Sexton. I don't even think it's a dice roll. Colin Sexton would be the best backup point guard in the league, and I'm sorry if, again, like, he can play more than 15 minutes even backing up Jalen Brunson. Like, you can play those guys.
Play him with Brunson. I mean, it didn't work out well in Cleveland with Garland, but I think, to be fair, both are better players now. So
yeah, and also, like, you can, like, it's in the regular season 100%. In the playoffs, that's a different thing. But we're talking about, like, having options, really, right? Like, you want to have options, and the Knicks right now just struggle to have options because they don't have a guy that can do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also, in that particular situation, you're also dealing with Trader Danny. So he's gonna want probably more than the Knicks can offer. But would generally agree. But I do think, like, it's what the point you made about Boston. A lot of that is the system and guys just knowing exactly what to do. Maybe continuity will help there. I don't think, to your point, I don't think it's really improved guys. especially the new guys really knowing where to be and like exactly what to read, and like not to the point where you don't have to think about it, right? Like I don't think if you ask Derek White, or Jaylen Brown or Tatum, like why did you move here? Why did you cut here? It's just second nature. It's not like they're doing conscious thought. So I think that's a big change. I do wonder, like, if you don't fill one of these pieces, how much does it help the other, right? If you get a Walker Kessler, for example, who can play heavy minutes next to Cat, do you need another wing, right, for that defense, right? Because your defense is going to be short up. You're a pretty big team now. Or if you find like a great four who can really cover for Cat at the 5, allow OG and Mikal to be in their natural positions, push hard to the bench, does that alleviate some of the other concerns, right? Does that alleviate the need for a center? I think all of those are interesting. The Knicks are a little strapped for assets. I mean, do you think they have the assets to make all these moves? That's the other question.
I don't know. But I don't think they need assets to make all those moves. Like, we know that the veteran free agent market with this new CBA, you can get decent value on the veteran minimum, right? Like Gary Trent Jr. was signed for a veteran minimum. Would he be a value add to this team? I would certainly think so.
He's what you described, right, with the gravity and quick trigger and all that.
Right. So I think that it's going to take time. Like, I understand why people get frustrated hearing that, but you need like a couple of seasons. They probably need 2 off seasons. Really, they probably need 2 off seasons. And it's fine if people think that's ridiculous and that's not good enough and whatever. Like, again, I think it's instructive to look at a team like Cleveland and see how long it took them. Fucking Cleveland. Look at how long it took Boston enough to draft Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They landed Kyrie Irving, right? They landed Gordon Hayward in free agency. They got Al Horford. He left. He came back. They had Isaiah Thomas 1 point. Like, they've cycled through so many quality players, and it took them like 7 or 8 years to finally put together a championship team.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
It just takes.
It's gonna take time. But they've gone about fucking 5 years. That's a significant. It's a significant. Like, that's a real step. Like, it takes time to build up to championship level, and it usually takes longer than 5 years. Not everybody is born on fucking third base like the Lakers and get handed generational superstar talents every time they look dead in the water. Like, it's not realistic. It doesn't happen. It takes time. Unless you're very lucky, right? Like the Lakers or like the Heat in 2010, where it was like, oh, well, we got LeBron and we got Wade and we got Chris Bosh. Everything's fucking awesome for us now. Like, it's rare.
Even they lost the title the first year.
Right. So it takes time. I think the Knicks losing Hartenstein set them back. That was a big setback. And as much as they made big moves this offseason to kind of keep them at a level, I think that those moves were also made with the idea of this gives us a 4-year window. And within that 4-year window, we will contend. It might take a year, it might take a couple of off seasons, but we're going to contend in that window. And that's how I would view this. So, can you address a couple of those holes next off season? Hopefully. And then, maybe we're surprised and maybe that's enough to get them to contention. But we don't know. We have to let it play out. All right. I think that's a good place to end this. Stacy, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Nothing to plug. Just all the work of the Strickland.
Awesome. I have nothing to plug either, but check out the pod I did with Prez. Check out the post games if you want to live through depression after the last 2 games. Aside from that, that's it. All right. Everybody enjoy the beginning of legal tampering NFL free agency tomorrow. Shout out to Myles Garrett. You totally are going to win a lot of football games in Cleveland. You proved how much you want to win. All right. That is our show for today. I hope everybody has a great week. I hope the Knicks have a great week. Thank you to our sponsor, Bet Online, and I will see you. I'll be on the post game tomorrow night, so I'll see you then. Peace.